This is why you should pull for Phantom. Also. Tragodia, or for others, Phantom Altar. Congratulations to all the 4 Phantom fans, you guys get an absolute monster this season. What is a Tragodia? He is a Ritualist. Ritualists are supporters that has the ability to inflict elemental injury, and very low stats overall, packaged with very minute range. That's pretty much it. So far the Ritualists are all pretty decent, to say the least. Bobbing has his Burn and Grill. Relakvin has her frequent Necrosis procs, especially in IS4, and Robot as a cheap one-time debuffer. And Virtuosa, which is essentially an upgrade from Relakvin. Sorry. Now, before moving on, I do want to explain the premise of Nervous Impairment, which is what he primarily inflicts, because there is a lot. Starting off, upon proccing this effect, the enemy explodes, dealing 1000 damage for normal and elite enemies, and 2000 damage for leader enemies, 6000 elemental damage, and inflicting 3 stacks of paralysis on a 10-second cooldown. The damage is pretty good, but you should focus on the paralysis more if you're using this on bosses, or anything. And what is paralysis? Well, each stack of paralysis interrupts an enemy when it attempts to perform a normal attack, with a maximum of 3 stacks. Paralysis has unlimited duration when not consumed, but units with status resistance lose 1 stack every 5 seconds. No joke, paralysis is nuts. Being able to consistently stun an enemy every time they normal attack is huge, because it saves you resources on stalling utility and damage from just one source. Basically what I'm trying to say, that it does a lot from just one thing. Now, comparing this to other elemental injuries that we have access to. 1. For Necrosis. It's not gonna beat Necrosis in terms of damage, along with its ability to nerf enemy attacks, and it's not gonna beat Burn for res debuff for certain art debuff situations. But I do concur that the ability to paralyze enemies is much better than art debuff, and can also sometimes be better than having a straight up better damage with enemy attack debuff. Now, the reason why I say sometimes is because sometimes you may need more stall than just straight up damage. Again, it's situational and depending on what you're doing. But if I were to rank them, it'll probably be this, and that. Although, even if paralysis stuns really well, you are still required to give that enemy a target to attack. Because remember, it only stuns when an enemy uses a normal attack. Anyways, moving on. Tragodia Talent 1. Attacks deal 30% attack as Nervous Impairment, additionally deal 20% attack as Nervous Impairment to enemies near the target. Now, I'm not going to compare him to Virtuosa too much. So comparing to Virtuosa, I'm just kidding. This talent works very well since each attack passively applies the effect. Like I said 2 minutes ago, Ritualist stats are not great and are greatly reliant on elemental injury. Him being able to constantly apply this on skill cooldown is a much bigger deal than you think. Now, comparing it to Virtuosa, she also has an extra bit of utility of being able to slow. But let me sell you on this. Say it with me now. Tragodia can apply this effect with AoE. Now you. I'm not gonna stop talking. This is great. It ensures that wave enemies are also constantly taking damage from this source without using skill. Moving on. Talent 2 is a nice passive thing that won't make a big difference in anything, since on one part it relies on slowing enemy attack speed to make your survivability a tiny bit better, but the other part relies on the enemy attacking to take Nervous Impairment damage. Even though it sounds contradicting, it still passively covers a variety of things during normal gameplay, so I would say it's still very nice to have. Very good AFK skill. I would suggest it'll pretty much be used the same as Virtuosa S1. However, one difference is that this skill is an offensive recovery. But don't worry, it procs basically 3 seconds faster than Virtuosa. So in terms of like the amount of times they can proc this, then Phantom takes the cake. But the person with the bigger cake is still Virtuosa. Why? Well, first of all, proc speed rate does not matter if the enemy is under a elemental damage cooldown, as they kinda just have to hold their skill anyway and not be able to hit them, which chains perfectly with Virtuosa's ability to hold multiple charges. Enough about Virtuosa. One thing that Phantom does have over Virtuosa is its ability to bind for a whole 3 seconds. So in terms of utility, that point goes to Phantom, and the least amount of attacks needed to deal elemental damage also goes to Phantom. Everything else goes to Virtuosa. Pretty good AFK skill, I'd say. Skill 2 lasts forever, blah blah, attacks faster, blah blah, bigger AoE application, blah blah. Bigger AoE can summon a cat that attracts 4 enemies, including aerials, and prioritizing elites and leader enemies. After the enemy reaches the cat will leave and drop a big stinky fart on the ground that slows nearby enemies for 6 seconds. Deal 150% attack as arch damage every half a second, and deal 25% attack as nervous impairment every half a second. Everything about this skill is, yeah, he does everything better and faster, but the one thing that you should focus on is the cat. This cat does too much. It sucks in pretty much anything, and weight does not mean anything either, meaning you can attract bosses and even drones. The cat will not be targetable by enemies, so it's very controlled, giving you the freedom to retreat it out of your own will, or you can just let it retreat by itself. The damage also deals elemental injuries, so it's just insane. Now, a few cons about this cat is that it does have a 25-second cooldown, but hopefully by the time you drag an enemy backwards, you have enough setup to kill them with, so you can safely wait for the cat cooldown. The skill cooldown is great, by the way. 25 seconds on auto is very good, but that's skill and not the cat, so don't get too excited for that. A few last mentions about this is that yes, the cat is locked behind the skill, but it's not that long of a wait. And obviously, if there are 10,000 mini enemies, you can't drag back all of them, you can only drag back 4. So in a situation where there's 4 or 5 elites, then yeah. Skill 3, similar to Virtuosa, his range expands, gain 125% attack and prioritizes enemies not under elemental burst effect. Enemies that have received nervous impairment from Tragodia will receive 10% attack as neural impairment every second until elemental burst. Enemies within attack range recover from burst effect 50% faster whenever a nervous impairment burst triggers, summon or refresh the Cage of Chaos at that target's location. Sounds like a lot, but it's honestly not. Everything pretty much just happens by itself, and you don't really need to pay attention that much when you activate skill 3. Tragodia will automatically apply elemental injury at a pretty fast rate alongside with its DOT injury. And after that, yeah, things happen. Though, I can't skip over the thing that makes his skill nuts, right? Obviously, one thing is that enemies within his massive range recover elemental cooldown much quicker, and yes, any elemental burst cooldown, but not sure why you're using any other ones instead of his range anyway, so let's ignore that. And one last thing is the cage. This cage does too much. Similar to the cat, the cage acts as a stalling utility, and it can bind up to 3 enemies. So looking at this, it's technically better than the cat for dealing with larger waves of enemies, and can still compare in stalling because of the bind, remember? So how does one unbind themselves from the cage? By hitting it 3 separate times. But oh wait, you're paralyzed. So every time you try to hit it, you cannot. And after the cage is finally destroyed, the cooldown is now halved, so you're getting paralyzed again in the next 5 seconds. Skill 2 is a little bit more niche than Skill 3. Since Skill 2's damage doesn't really compare to Skill 3, so you're pretty much only using it for the cat. And Skill 3 does basically everything like damage and utility, but it's locked behind a massive cooldown. So generally, I would say you should level Skill 3 first before Skill 2, just because that the cat still pulls well even when underleveled. And the 5 seconds extra weight isn't really that bad. And Skill 3 I would argue is more important since it has no target limit and does damage and utility. Similar to Virtuosa, you can level Skill 1 if you want for AFK clears, but generally if you have Virtuosa Skill 1 leveled already, then you should probably keep using that instead of Tragodia Skill 1. In summary, Skill 3, Skill 2, Skill 1. You can skip Skill 1 if you would like, and could even skip Skill 2 if you just don't care. I mean, I don't feel like I have to say much about his viability in Endgame. His damage and utility are both tied to elemental damage, so if there's a boss or enemy that doesn't have resistance to elemental, then he's just bound to be very, very good. Starting out with CC, as we all know, all enemies are stat sticks because of the modifiers. Even so, the modifiers doesn't give them any elemental resistance, so it doesn't stop Phantom from doing his normal damage and his pull or his bind. IS is pretty much the same. Not all enemies, and I'm not gonna lie, there's probably no enemies that can resist elemental damage since that will completely kill the subclass. Controversial? Definitely not. Anyways, Phantom in IS pretty much performs the same. His bind and elemental damage will do what they do until the enemies die. So yeah, Tragodia is pretty consistent in terms of any condition, basically. And finally, should you pull for Phantom Altar or Tragodia? Yes, if you like to sing. Yes, if you're an elemental damage abuser. No, if you didn't understand anything I've said up until now. And no, if you don't care or don't want to, I guess. Now, will I be pulling for Phantom Altar? Yes. Hey, haven't done this in a while, huh? Anyway, I hope you're pulling for Tragodia so I can keep seeing I spent about $500 and sold my car and it didn't get him. Comments. In literally a couple of days, I will be visiting Japan and I will be hunting for any Arknights merch. But also I will be visiting Osaka and some other places because culture or something. I will be posting any travel journey things or pictures or anything on my Twitter. X. Anyways, thank you for watching and I'll see you in 3 weeks. But probably not because I'm probably going to be late again.